Well, I want to welcome everyone to this Happy Learning Hour. We are very fortunate to be here with Kathy Robinson. And I know everybody's busy, but we look forward to this conversation. So I want to introduce Kathy, and then we'll get going.
Okay.
And this is part of our Leadership Summit, Leadership Legacy Summit, and that will kind of come clear as we get going. My name's Jann Freed, but you can call me Dr. Jann. So prior to becoming a certified wellness coach, workshop leader, and author, Kathy Robinson spent more than 25 years assessing the wellness of Fortune 500 companies. She was a chief audit executive and chief risk officer before turning the lens from professional assessments to personal ones and began helping her clients optimize their well-being, especially in times of transition or when striving toward new wellness goals. She also teaches, facilitates online offerings based on her wellness methodology that include practices such as writing and meditation. But I wanted to go back to this line where it says, she helps people, especially in times of transition. Well, I don't think there could be more transition going on than right now. So I really look forward to exploring that. So welcome, Kathy.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here, Jann.
Well, great. Well, what was tell us about the motivation and drive for running. I didn't put this in your bio because it was one of my questions, but for running an ultra marathon at age 54.
Yeah. After not running a marathon at all. That was my first
I always say that I'm pretty sure I'll die without running a marathon. So, and so far that's true. So.
Yeah, well, I got into endurance sports in my early 50s through a charity cycle ride from Boston to New York. And in training for that event, it was a corporate event, I really liked the time and the process that I had to go through to get myself ready to be able to do this event. I hadn't been on a bike in like 20 years, so cycling didn't come naturally to me. And I wanted that challenge again. I was reading a book called Finding Ultra by a guy named Rich Roll, and he made it seem attainable. So I said, I want to try doing this. And I found an ultra marathon in New Jersey, and I had 5 months to prepare and created a training plan. I said, if I'm going to be a wellness coach and I had just gotten certified, I should probably put myself through one of these big challenges so I might be able to help my clients as I go forward.
Well, just describe an ultra marathon because maybe people are listening and they really don't know.
Sure. So an ultra is defined as anything more than a marathon. So I did a 50K, just 31 miles, but I had never run more than 17 miles when I was in my 40s. So there had been a gap there. But it is, a lot of these can go up to 100, 200 miles, some of these races. So this was a baby ultra, and it was in the hills, not the mountains of New Jersey, but it was in November. So it was quite cold, and it was quite a challenge to be able to get my body ready to be able to take 6 hours of nonstop running.
Have you done another one since?
I have not. I am looking. I actually started CrossFit since then. So that has its own set of challenges. And so I like to try new things. I love getting out on the trails, and I don't know what I would do without that time. Because again, this was all about having these long periods of time where I wasn't in the office, I wasn't making decisions, and I really just had a chance to kind of check in. It was a great way for me to do that and be outdoors.
Do you plan to do another one?
I would never say never, and I would do something more. Probably if I was doing it again, I would do a 50 miler or a 100 miler. So I can't take that off the table. But right now, in starting the business and writing the book, this is my ultra. But once the summer passes, I may entertain that again. Yeah.
What about just a marathon?
I actually did my first marathon in training for the ultra. It wasn't advisable to do that, but I needed to know how I felt at mile 26. That was really important to me. And so about 7 weeks before the ultra, I went to a local bike path with my Fitbit, and I went and ran a marathon. And I knew at that point I would be able to finish the ultra, given how I felt at the end of the marathon.
Right. Well, that's impressive. Well, leadership is my thing. And so what would you say, what are the leadership lessons that you learned either through training or running or even after achieving that goal?
Yeah. And, I was working, I had a global team at the time. I was working in corporate at the time. And I think there's something about seeing your boss make a commitment like that. And that's not like a usual commitment, right? So being able to make that commitment outside of work and sticking to it. And they knew about the training, 'cause people were really curious about it. They knew I had done the cycle ride. So I think there's something about showing that, making that commitment, having that resilience, showing up every day, having the consistency, even when you don't feel like doing it. So I hope that was the takeaway. I did have folks coming up to me, really using that as an example of something that they were facing that was difficult. And it's like, well, if you can run 30 miles at your age, which I took as a compliment, that this doesn't seem so bad. So I hope that that was the lesson it imparted, but also for me as a leader, it also gave me a sense of the terrain is always changing when you're running an ultra. And so is the business environment. And as we get into our discussion, it's amazing the parallels between business and, in my case, risk management and wellness. We're trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to achieve certain objectives, whether they're wellness objectives or business objectives, and things get in our way.
Mm-hmm.
How do we navigate them? And so that's the way I think it really helped feed into how I was wrapping up my corporate career. There were a lot of those lessons that I was able to take with me of, when you really put your mind to it and do something like this, there's no one that could ever take that away from you, just like the big milestones in your career.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. Well, tell us about wellness. How does it change, or what should we be thinking about? Because as we get older, every day we're all getting older. So it doesn't matter if you're in your 20s, 30s, whatever. So what should we really think about?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite topics because I can honestly say I'm about to turn 56 and I feel better at 56, 26, 36, 46. Like for me, it feels like it keeps getting better. And it's not about how fast I can run. I could run faster when I was younger, without a doubt. It's not about physical ability so much as it is how I feel inside. So I believe, and that's the premise of what I was writing about, our best years truly can be ahead. And just like business, it's all of these daily decisions that we make and the impact of those decisions, right? Every day we're faced with choices. And the more you're on the positive side, whatever that might mean for you, because everybody's definition of wellness is different for them. But the more on the positive side you are, the better the progress will be, right? It's a pretty simple math equation. So I don't think, and that's part of my excitement, I really believe that we can reimagine and reframe midlife to say, you know what, our best years can be ahead of us. I certainly feel that way. How do we make sure we're clearing the way for that to naturally happen and evolve?
Yeah, that's actually another passion of mine. I'm certified as a saging leader. Saging just means positive aging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually studied this stuff, and I blog. I have a blog, monthly blog called Becoming a Sage. So I'm very passionate about this part of, aging and saging. And
I love that. I love that term, saging. I'm going to have to borrow that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, there's a whole movement. And you might want to go to the website is Saging, and it's with an E, SAGE-ING. They copyrighted that. So it's saging with an E.org.
All right.
And it's a great organization. I'm pretty active, and I've met a lot of great people. And I think you could incorporate some of that in your work. And
I love that.
yeah. In fact, I recommend everybody going to that. We have a conference every other year, and I recommend everybody going because it's about personal growth. And just because you may not be working for money, but we all should keep growing. And so.
Yeah. And there's something about that word midlife. And I think that's why I'm almost on this personal mission. When I was drafting this book, the tagline was about optimizing vitality and well-being at midlife. And everybody that read an early version of this, no one liked the word midlife. Male, female, didn't matter the age. There's something about that word. And I love that power because it's like, how do we change that conversation? How do we make it so this becomes a very empowering time, not a time where we're saying, well, it's just going to get worse. Like my best years are behind me. I don't think that's the case at all. So that's one of my personal challenges.
Right. Well, one thing I do in workshops when I'm integrating saging topics. As I like to ask people, well, when are we in, say, oh, 50, 60. So then somebody, finally somebody will say 40, because, the average age, life expectancy is 80, 82. So it's really 40, 41. And people don't like to think that that's midlife.
Exactly.
But then that really gets their attention.
Yes.
So when I do that, well, this is great. Well, we're going to get into your book here. So why do leaders need to think about wellness? I mean, why is wellness important for them? We might think of some obvious reasons, but beyond those, maybe.
Yeah. So it's the normal. We'll start with the obvious, which is the oxygen mask, right? It's like, if you can't bring your best self to work, your productivity, your effectiveness is not going to be what it could be. So just from a pure work equation, obviously that comes into play. But I think as leaders, we are to, we're trying to lead by showing, right? And so what is it that I can show my team? How, if I'm taking better care of myself, they'll take better care of themselves, as an example. So for me, I was always very much an early riser. I exercise in the morning. I would get to work a little bit later. That gave my team permission to, you can, if you want to work out in the morning and you want to come in a little bit later, like, that's fine too. So that sense of leading by example too, it's not just our own well-being.
Right.
That's important so we can do what we need to do. But how do we make sure that the rest of the team feels empowered and engaged to make the kinds of decisions that work for them as well?
Yeah, really walking the talk and leading by example, it's perfect. Well, I'm eager to know more about your book. So tell us the title and really, why should we read it? Tell us what it's about, and kind of the helicopter view of what's really the highlights.
Sure, yeah. So it's called the Athena Principles, Simple Wellness Practices for Overworked Professionals.
Okay.
And
So you didn't keep midlife in a title.
I did not. Because, when I really thought about it, if it was that much of an aversion, I want people to read it.
Yeah.
That doesn't change my life work, which is helping people through that. So I had to come to that, because I was really stubborn for a while and I finally let it go. But it really starts with me crossing that finish line at 54 and looking back and realizing that I could not run one lap when I was in my mid-30s. So what happened? What happened in those 20 years that allowed somebody that really wasn't an athlete in any way to be able to do that? And so it goes through really 3 wellness realizations I had, one in my mid-30s, one at 40, and one in my mid-40s. And they become less physical and more esoteric as time goes on, which is really interesting, because I define wellness. There's a wellness spectrum that I created that goes from vitality, which is what you would think, nourishment and exercise. But then there's also this middle section of flow, creativity, simplification, how our life is working. And then the last part of it is connection, spirituality, our relationships. To me, that's all wellness. I think of it very holistically. So as I was going through these realizations, as I was in my mid 30s to mid 40s, the first one was just, I was out of shape. In my mid 30s, it was Wall Street in the 90s. We were working hard, we were playing hard. So I had to get my own house in order. And that has stayed consistent for 20 years. I mean, the practices have evolved, but that stayed. That's great. The second one, when I was 40, I was at the last Wall Street firm that I had worked for. It was a top tier firm. I was completely burnt out, and I went on vacation to Alaska, and I finally had, in the middle of all of this amazing wilderness, the quiet to hear that little whisper of, you've got to make a change, because this is not balance. And so both of those realizations resulted in external changes that were very visible. The last one, in my mid 40s, was more on that connection part, where I was really deeply connecting with myself through a writing retreat. I was out on the West Coast. This one was much more impactful, but it was less visible. But that's what really put me on the path to, you know what, once corporate is done for me, which I knew was going to be around 55, what's next? So it gave me that what's next midlife kinds of questions before it became a midlife crisis.
Right, I love that.
That's the way I think of these 3 things. So throughout the book, these are sprinkled. There's other people's stories in there as well. But really, I was trying to codify what did I do in those 20 years that allowed me to feel the way I do today? So there is a methodology coming from an ex-risk management person. There's
Mhm.
a methodology of how we kind of step through this. There are principles, and the principles are self-compassion, intention, consistency, growth mindset, and accountability. And for each one of those principles are practices that a busy professional can incorporate. They're short, but they are writing, meditation, and what I call positive action. So things that you can do to kind of start to incorporate this in your life without having to make big life changes. So
Uh-huh.
that's the premise.
Yeah, no, I love it. Is it out? Can I
It
buy it?
is. So the
Okay.
paperback is available on Amazon. The audio book will be up. It's in review now, so it'll be up this month, and the ebook will be up this month as well.
Oh, that's great. Well, it really fits into my work, so I can't wait to read it. Well, let's talk about the current times. Okay, we're living in a pandemic here. How can we stay healthy? Or how does the pandemic maybe change your work? Or how can we stay healthy in these social distancing times? Or
Yeah, so I think maybe we'll take the latter. So when I think of staying healthy, we're about to make these decisions now, right? Because things are starting to loosen up some.
yes, they are.
So I think about it, and I'm just to be clear, I'm not a doctor, just an ex-audit guy. So this is how I'm thinking about it as I'm moving forward, and how I would advise some clients to think about it. So it's both internal and external. We'll start with the external because that's easier. So I'm taking what I would call a risk-based approach to decision making, right? So we're going to be going out into the world. I think about it in two ways. What's my level of exposure? And that is more around density, how many people will be wherever I'm going. And then I also think about is the amount of time I'm spending. So I gave you the example that I run the trails here, and I know there's a lot of concern about people running. We're outside, there's good air circulation. You know, I run with a gaiter, so when I'm passing somebody, I can just pull it over my mouth to be respectful. But I personally am less concerned about being, as long as it's not packed in, but being, you know, passing people by on the trails. Going into a food store, I'm there for a short period of time. We're going down aisles, there's air circulation. When we get to clusters of people, that's a different level of decision making. So now we're getting a little bit more risky, and I'll have to think about that as the time comes. What would I do? Would I go back into a restaurant? So that's at least how I'm thinking about it in those two areas of what's my exposure from a density perspective, and the air that's available to me, and then the time that I'm spending there.
Yeah.
What I think a lot of people aren't talking about is the more of the internal questions, which is the self-care part. So how do we make sure that we personally are doing all we can to keep our immune system where it needs to be? And it's not just eating the right things and exercising. That is important. And I take a whole bunch of natural things to help keep my body where it needs to be. But what about sleep? What about the levels of stress some people are experiencing because they can't get out? There's people, family is there, they're homeschooling kids. Where is that stress level, and what can we do to minimize that stress? When we first had the shelter at home orders, I actually took out my pen and paper. I made a spreadsheet because I'm spreadsheet oriented. And I'm like, okay, what are the things that I need to keep myself well? And this is just for me. And it's things like journaling and meditating and getting outside, making sure I move my body, connecting with somebody every single day. How can I have a good sense of connection? And there were maybe 10 things. And I literally would go through, limit the news. And I would go through and I would color code it like a heat map, just to make sure I wasn't letting the important things that we tend to let kind of fall by the wayside. I wanted to make sure I kept that front and center. And just this morning I was writing, I'm like, you know what? The end of the month, it's probably time to let that spreadsheet go. But it was my anchor when things started to sway and the sand started to shift beneath us. It's like, okay, I have my practices I can come back to. It's my home base.
Right.
And I think that's what's really kept me in the game while we've been going through this.
Right. Well, and I think that's good advice for any time, we're experiencing or perceiving stress. What maybe it's not a spreadsheet, even though I like that idea, but what is our home base? What's our anchor, to keep us, well, that's good. How have you noticed any difference in how they view wellness in this kind of time of life and death? When all of a sudden, I think people are much more aware that, we're not invincible, we're
Yeah.
not immortal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're, like some of the wake ups, the realizations that I told you about that I had, they came to me in time. If you're not going through that process and suddenly you're confronted with something like this, mortality looms big.
Hmm.
And all of the decisions that maybe weren't made in somebody's best interest suddenly come to the forefront. And it can be overwhelming because the world around us is changing. And suddenly we're getting confronted with all of this is happening. It's hard to kind of synthesize all of that. And I think that's what adds to the level of stress that suddenly becomes so overwhelming, because things that have been put to the side with no impact, suddenly it's very impactful because I'm faced with the decisions that I've made and what that could mean.
Hmm.
So I think those are the times that you just have to take a deep breath. You are where you are, and it's not about getting from where you are today to optimal. It's where you are today to one step forward. And what might that be? And I think enough of those days where it's just a step forward, I think that's what starts to build confidence, and that's what starts to build ease. There's a little bit more, less stress, because we're actually doing something, whatever that is, even if it's taking a walk for 15 minutes out in the sunshine.
Hmm.
That's something. So I think lowering that expectation and actually putting some action behind the worry really goes a long way.
Yeah. I like your emphasis on action. What did you say about I think in your book, you have practices that you include, but
Oh, positive actions.
positive action, positive
Yeah.
action. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm making a note, positive action. Okay, I like that. Well, another topic that I'm really into now is legacy. And legacy is one of the main components of this whole idea of saging.
Mhm.
So I just have a few questions that I love to ask people about legacy.
Sure.
How do you define it? Or when I even use the word, what's it mean to you?
Yeah. I love words as a writer. So the word legacy to me carries a really interesting weight. So I think in your context, and this is the way that I'll answer the question, I think you're talking about how do we leave something enduring, like some enduring quality behind when our work is done. That's the
Mhm.
way I think, that's the meaning that I think you have there. For me, when I think of legacy, it has weight. It feels like something handed down, or it feels like we've done so much talking about legacy systems, so meaning outdated. So
Mhm.
that's why where I first went when I heard that word.
Oh,
But
I see.
I think the way you mean it is, how do we leave something that's enduring?
Yes.
So for me, when I was in corporate, especially when I was wrapping up, I did not think about legacy because I don't feel like I have control over how my legacy will be remembered. I did, though, think a lot about, and this could be synonymous, about stewardship, right? So while I was in this role of chief audit executive and chief risk officer, was I being a good steward? And I actually said, as I was leaving the company, to both management and the board, I hope you think I was a good steward of the function. Meaning, I'm hoping that because I was there in that leadership role, we have taken it to the next level while honoring the past, not leaving that behind, but building on that past and positioning ourselves so when that next person came in, they would be able to take it to even the next level. And so that's kind of the way I felt about my time there. Am I leaving the function, the team, the company in a better place? And while I was there, did I do all I could do to bring it to the next level, to change the conversation? Risk management and internal audit isn't always the most sexy thing in people's minds, but was I able to change that traditional audit risk view to one of strategic and helping people achieve their objectives, their corporate objectives? Can I have a seat at that strategic table? If I was able to do that, then I feel that I was a good steward while I was there.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent answer. This next one might be a little difficult to answer, maybe, but can you share a story that comes to mind? You've given a great story about yourself. I love that, with this whole idea of stewardship. But a story that comes to mind about legacy, um, or someone about legacy. you know, it was a great personal story. I love that.
Yeah, I actually think about, so it's two ends of the spectrum, right? So I'll give you two quick snapshots. The first is one of the most influential people in my life was my grandmother. Born 1904, Italian, Brooklyn, never drove, never lived anywhere outside of that one block, lived to be in her 90s, was the epitome of love and resilience in a difficult life, raised 4 kids in a 3-room apartment. What was it about her when it came to legacy? She was so content and joyful in all that she had, which was very little from a material standpoint and everything from a connection standpoint. So those are the roots that I'm born from, right? So I never forget that, because that is always where I come from. I come from that 3-room apartment in Brooklyn. On the other end of the spectrum, I think about the executives I had the privilege to work with in my last company, CEO and CFO, a 70-year-old company that started with a 3-person operation, has gone on to be a $14 billion company, 60,000 people operating in 100 countries. They never lost sight, the management that I dealt with, never lost sight of the history and what got us here, with the realization that if we stayed doing exactly what we were doing, we would become irrelevant in the new world. So we had to innovate, but we had to innovate not at the expense of the past and not at the expense of the future. So making these short bets, but how do we really do the right thing? So I think what links both of those stories, even though they're very different, is this sense of inner compass and alignment of, no matter what, really doing the right thing for your, in my grandmother's case, family, in the case of the executives, stakeholders, which include associates, the board, the shareholders. How do you balance those needs and do the right thing every time, every time?
Yeah, that's excellent. Love it. How do you think people might change what they're thinking about legacy given the pandemic?
That's a great
And
question.
maybe we could even weave that into how they're thinking about health and wellness given the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's less about outcome now. And I think it's more about leading through change and challenge. And how do we do that, right? So in the past, a good leader was a strong leader, and we were going to we take the next hill. I think there's this inward focus, and there's more balance. I think people really understand now, having had to shelter at home with all of these different challenges and still show up and be effective at work. I think we got a really good sense of what everybody's day-to-day challenges are. And I think there's more empathy. We can call it professional empathy, but I definitely think that there is more empathy for what another person is doing, especially people who don't have the privilege of sheltering at home and are on the front lines. And there are so many that are doing that, or that are actually dealing with this virus. So I heard this quote that we're all in, something to the effect of, we're all floating on the same ocean, but we're all in different boats, or something like that. Like we're all having the same experience, but it's very individual. There are individual challenges for all of us. And I really think through this, there's this sense of empathy of like, okay, how can I help, rather than you have to have this done by 5 o'clock. So
Right.
I think as we go through this, I did a quick Google search before I got on, because I wanted to look at stewardship. The
Okay.
very first thing that came up, the characteristics of stewardship: committed to selfless service, no desire for power, responsible and accountable, which I think is a shift from the normal leadership characteristics you would see. And I would add to that, as we go forward, I think really good leaders are going to need to be calm,
Mm-hmm.
pragmatic,
Mm-hmm.
and optimistic, not glossing over what's happening, but to lead people to a place knowing that there's going to be another side of this. It may not be tomorrow, but we're going to get there if we all stick together. I think those qualities are going to become incredibly valuable as we go through, and people are going to naturally gravitate towards folks that have that calm, pragmatic view of, how do we think through this? I've been very impressed with some things that I'm seeing as There are certain governors that are they can step through and explain. We're going to need business leaders and community leaders to be able to do that same thing, explain what we're feeling, what we're seeing, and show that there is a way through, and be ready to move as the tide moves. And it's going to be moving. It's much more fluid. The world is much more fluid, or it feels that way, than it was just 2 months ago.
Yeah. It's amazing how so many things have changed so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Kathy, this is great. Well, what else should I have asked you that our people need to know, either about leadership, wellness, legacy, what you're predicting for the future?
Yeah.
What are you predicting for the future?
I wish I had that crystal ball.
But in terms of like wellness, or like even think about marathon, think about races, Now, again, you're outside. And I did want to say something, because I read this article, and it was by a professor, and I forget what college, very well researched, and it was in the New York Times. And you were so right that it has to do with what his conclusion was. It has to do with how long and how intense in terms of crowds. Okay. I mean, like he was saying, I'm a former college professor, and basically he was saying, I don't know about classes in person, because you're in a room for hours, it could be an hour and a half, could be 3 hours. You're in the same space. He talked about churches, choirs, that being in the same space for a long period of time is riskier.
Yep.
I would think airlines.
Yep.
Flying. I mean, we went to Morocco last October, and now I can't even imagine taking a trip like that. So, I mean, what do you think in terms of, or this isn't really your area, I guess, but, even because it's not wellness or recreation, but it's, concerts and, professional sports. I don't know if you're staying on top of what they're saying about, and it doesn't have to be professional, college sports.
Yeah.
Where thousands go to football games. What are you thinking, or what?
Yeah. So, it's very timely too. I have to take a trip next week, and I have the choice of flying or driving 1,500 miles round trip. I'm driving.
Are you driving?
And it's not out of fear so much. It's just, I don't know enough about, and I haven't taken the time to look to see exactly how certain airlines are handling certain things. So it feels like you don't really know until you get there. And so I just I love driving anyway. So, I took it as an opportunity to kind of take a long road trip. So that's fine. I think two thoughts I have. One is, I think it's going to be a longer haul than people are anticipating. So I don't think it means that we're going to be in our houses for 2 years, but I do think we'll be dealing with ups and downs. And again, I'm not a prognosticator, but I think we'll be, seeing more of a wave of outbreaks and having to do certain things as time goes on until we really do have a solution. So it's going to be longer. I do think that there's going to be a new norm. So I don't think we're going to flip a switch and we're going to go back to the way things are. And from the folks that I'm talking to, I don't know if they want that. There has been so much busyness and so much churn and so much hamster wheel of life that this pause, I think, has given folks some consideration of, how do I really want to spend my time? So I think it's going to be an interesting way of kind of coming up to whatever this new norm is. This really is our ultramarathon. We're going to be at this for a while. The second thing that I would offer is, there have been great leaps forward in times of disruption. And the example that was shared with me last week, which I didn't realize, our modern medicine really came to be at the time of the Civil War. I was unaware of this, that it wasn't the war, the damage that was done in the war so much as it was disease and infectious disease that killed a lot of people. But out of that came this sense of triage, and came pain management. Anesthesia came around at that time. And think about the medicine that we're hearing now. We're hearing not about, well, we'll inject a virus in somebody. It's like, we'll inject the blueprint into somebody so the body can figure out how to create antibodies without infecting a person. Like, this wasn't even, talked about it, maybe in medical circles, but not for us. So I actually think we're going to see, because out of disruption comes opportunity and innovation. And I think that we are going to be in a much different place, hopefully a better one. And it will be good for the folks who are good with change. It's going to be difficult for the folks that like things the old way. And I think we'll see that impact in more of some of the mental health issues that will probably come to bear over time. Maybe some of the issues with substance abuse or, those types of things. So I think we're going to be dealing with the fallout of this for a long period of time. But for the folks that are embracing this as, okay, we're going to a new place, let's co-create that, this could be a very exciting time.
No, I agree with you. And I've always said, where there's a threat, there's an opportunity. And so I think there are opportunities, and lots of, there's a lot of people writing about the silver linings and all of this. And I really loved what you had to say about stewardship. And because for years I've been advocating servant leadership, which is very much about stewardship, and oh, that's wonderful. Well, we're kind of coming to a close here, Kathy. Other words of wisdom or other things that you'd want to share? I mean, I know you've got business on your calendar. What are some of the things coming up on your calendar that you'd be willing to share with us in terms of the wisdom?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be doing some writing circles, both for non-writers and writers.
You're leading those?
That I will be leading this summer. Yeah, they'll be on my website probably in about a month or so. But again, all remote. This has forced all of us, right, to figure out how we might be of service in an online manner. So there'll be a series of writing circles. Right now, I'm doing one that is a mix of writing and meditation, and that really is a lovely combination for some folks. And there'll also be a video challenge, a 90-day video challenge for wellness, because I get excited when I get to kind of change the conversation a little bit. So things like writing and meditation have that feeling for a lot of people of like, oh, I have to sit on a cushion, or I need to write beautiful prose. And I'm turning that around. It's like, no, these are tools. These are ways for you to get in to listen to your own wisdom. The whole point of Athena having strength, the shield, and wisdom, the owl, I believe we all have that. And it's my job to try to draw that out and to give people practices so they can listen to their own inner wisdom and really live their best lives going forward.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'm ordering your book today.
Wonderful.
So for sure, Kathy, for sure, I'm ordering your book because it really does fit in with my whole idea of legacy. I'm working on a book, and this fits in nicely. Okay?
Excellent. I love it.
Yeah, very much. And could you just, we'll have all of your contact information in the materials when we talk about the summit, but can you tell us your website?
Absolutely. It's www.athenawellness.com. And if anybody goes there, there is a free download of an overview of the Athena Principles with a little action plan. So something to get you up and running in under 10 minutes. And there's also the ability to get a blog. I publish a blog twice a month, and I'm working on a newsletter to be able to seamlessly get that out to folks who are interested. Okay. So that's the way to get in contact with me. There's a contact form there if anybody wants to shoot me a note. And also the book is on Amazon. And again, it's the Athena Principles, and it's Kathy Robinson.
Okay. Great, Kathy. Well, thank you very much. You've given us a lot to think about. And I, too, like to talk about may the rest of life be the best of life. So you might want to look at my site.
I have it. I took notes.
Oh, did you? Okay. Well, the saging,
Yeah.
That's not my site. My site's just jannfried.com. But my last book was Leading with Wisdom, Sage Advice from 100 Experts. So anyway, that's interesting. Well, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. And I appreciate you helping me out in this way.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jann, and be well, everybody.